Hello YouTube, Jeff Kelly here. I was thinking about the 357 Magnum revolver and when it came about, and also thinking about how late to the party Colt was in so many things. This is the first 357 Magnum. It was called the Registered Magnum. It was developed in 1935. The 357 Magnum cartridge was developed in 1934. And I've done a video on this already. You could order this in many different barrel lengths, and they were all custom orders. It was a very fine handgun. And Smith & Wesson had the 357 Magnum market for 20 years, except for one exception where a Colt custom shop came up with a 357 Magnum, which you had to special order. That Colt was called the Shooting Master, and it came out in 1936. There's very few of them around. That's why I don't have one of them here. And they're about $3,800, but they're very rare. That was the only entry for Colt until 1953. And I'll show you that in 1 second. This is the Colt 357. Came out in 1953. It was their first entry into the market in a 357 Magnum. They couldn't call it a 357 Magnum because that was a proprietary name of Smith & Wesson, although it does have on the barrel 357 Magnum cartridge. Now this ran alongside the Colt Trooper in the 1950s, which was a .38 special revolver. In 1962, they combined this 357 Magnum and the Colt Trooper and just called it the Colt Trooper, but they made the Trooper into a 357 Magnum and a .38 special. So it took Colt almost 20 years to get into the 357 Magnum market. This here is the Colt Trooper. This happens to be a 1965, but it's close enough to the 62, it looks the same. And it is a 357 Magnum. So this continued through the 1960s. And of course we know that Colt also got into the Python market in 1955, but from 35 to 53 there was a gap there. Then the .44 Magnum was developed in 1954, 55, and in late 55, 56, Smith & Wesson came out with a revolver to accommodate the Remington .44 Magnum. And here it is, the pre-Model 29. This one happens to be dated in 1957, just before they started having model numbers for Smith & Wesson. But this is the first .44 Magnum revolver that Smith came out with. 6.5-inch barrel, Coke bottle grips, pinned and recessed, pin barrels, recessed cylinder, and it kind of struggled along until Dirty Harry came about, but nevertheless they did have a powerful handgun for shooting game, I guess deer or other size game along those lines. So Smith & Wesson had this from 55 all the way till today. There's a couple of other examples that came out in the 1980s. Here is an example that came out in 1985, the Lew Horton 3-inch. Lew Horton distributors ordered 5,000 of these in 1985. Special order, they were the only ones that were doing the 3-inch. Smith & Wesson made them up, and they couldn't sell them all, so they sent them off to a few other distributors to sell them. But this is a good example of the 3-inch model, 44 Magnum. In '87, they came out with the stainless steel 3-inch model of the 44 Magnum. This was the 629, and it was very popular. So you had the years 1956, and then 1990, Colt finally decided to come out with a 44 Magnum. So they lost 35 years in that market. So let's take a look at that. In 1990, the Colt Anaconda came along, and it was their first entry into the 44 Magnum market. So as we said, it took them 35 years to get into the 44, but they finally did it. And it just adds to probably the poor management that Colt Firearms had over the years, because they were always late to the party. They made fine firearms, but they seemed to be late to the party all the time. But anyway, that's kind of the progression of the 357 Magnum and the 44 Magnum between Smith & Wesson and Colt. And I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you on the next one.